All righty. Well, thank you very much and welcome everybody to the session called Metrics That Matter. My name is David Broussard and I'm working with Alan. You want to introduce yourself real quick? Say hi.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name's Alan Ellison. Happy to meet everyone.
Yeah. So today in our session, a couple things we're gonna clear some logistics up front along with our introductions, but we will introduce ourselves and kind of give you some background of where we come from. We're going to talk at a high level of why metrics are important in the first place and why we need them. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into understanding that it's not, metrics aren't just a number, they're a lot more than that. And then at the end, we'll talk about how it all is brought together and some of the challenges that people and organizations face when they're starting to try to understand metrics and why they matter and how to present them to people. So want to make sure everybody recognizes as you come in, you should have seen the banner across the top. We are recording this presentation, okay? You will be emailed a link afterwards of the recording as well, so that you'll be able to chance to see it. Want to make sure that if you have any questions, we'll be addressing them at the end of the webinar. If you do have things, you can go ahead and type them into the chat window, and we'll be happy to go ahead and address them as we get near the end. But we'll go ahead and handle those afterwards. So with that, let's go ahead and get going. So, Alan, you're up first. You're our first speaker here. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more deeply?
Yes, sounds good. Again, my name's Alan Ellison. I'm actually the newest practice manager for our national data and AI practice. Have been in the SQL and business intelligence field for roughly about 20 years. So we kind of covered the gamut. Of course, now everything moving towards Azure has kind of flipped everything upside down. So we have to learn a whole new skill set. But we're always up for the challenge. So, Mr. David.
Thank you. And my name is David Broussard. I'm a principal consultant with Catapult Systems. And my role at the company, I work in the productivity practice. And my role in the company is as an M365 evangelist, which means I get to go forth and preach the gospel of Microsoft up in the cloud. And what that really means is that I'm helping organizations like yours figure out the best ways to leverage technology so that you can be successful and achieve your business goals. And if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm at dbrusa. I'm also on Facebook at dbrusa, SlideShare at dbrusa, LinkedIn at dbrusa. You can find me that, and I think I even have that set up as my email address, dbrusa@catapultsystems.com, if you want to send me something there. So if you have further questions, feel free to reach out to Alan and I. Okay. All righty. So let's talk about, to start with, why do metrics matter? So Alan, I'm gonna let you start off here.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about, as you can see from the slides, obviously we're not going to read all those off. We'll let you read this for yourself. But there's definitely some questions that we go through whenever we talk about this particular subject on, exactly what it says. Why do they matter? David, I'm actually going to shoot a couple of questions at you. But one of the things that we do want to kind of put a big wrapper around this, one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about is sort of a road trip analogy. If we're trying to drive from, let's say from San Antonio.
Let's go to Vegas, right? Man. Let's go to Vegas, San Antonio to Vegas,
you.
because the pandemic is over and we're going to go party and we're going to have a good time, right?
Oh, thanks, because I'm tired of going to Oklahoma. So we're going to go to Vegas now. That's way more fun. And along that trip, we have certain things that need to happen in order to make this successful. And David, I'll actually ask you a question here. For something as simple as that, it's just arriving in Vegas. I know it sounds like a lot of fun, but does that mean that we succeeded just because we arrived?
Well, and I think Alan, that's a great point, because the success of our road trip of getting to Vegas, right, is to actually get to Vegas. Okay. But if you think about the drive from San Antonio to Vegas, and I've actually made that drive in the past, we're going to be going through some very desolate and barren terrain. If you've ever driven through West Texas, that's barren and desolate terrain. Okay. I've actually broken down out there. and you can be in the middle of nowhere, broken down out there, and you don't want to be that way. And when you're getting close to Vegas, Vegas is in the middle of a desert, and you really don't want to break down in your car in the middle of the desert either. So success is getting there, but along the way, I'm going to need some help in making sure that I'm optimizing my ability to actually get there at the same time, right? And so it is a little bit more than that.
Okay. So when you're making that trip, because obviously we need to arrive healthy, no accidents, preferably no speeding tickets, things like that. When you're trying to make that trip, kind of moving down the slides here, our vehicle or even surroundings have to give us some kind of feedback. What would you be looking for in that kind of scenario?
Well, let's imagine for a second here and think about the things that are in our car, because in our car we have a dashboard, which, gosh, we often talk about dashboards, both in our cars, but also inside of our business. That's a pretty common term that we use for analyzing metrics, and there's a reason for that. The whole purpose behind this in our car dashboard is to give us the feedback and information to make sure that we know that we're arriving and that we're going in the right direction. So if I was getting ready to drive from San Antonio to Las Vegas, one of the first things I do when I got in the car is I would plug in the destination into my GPS, right? And one of the advantages of having it plugged into my GPS is it's going to plot the route for me. Okay. And one of the cool things about that is, if in the old days, actually in the old days, but in the old days of MapQuest and things like that, we would actually print out all of your turn-by-turn directions. And if you got off that sheet, right, because maybe there was a detour or an accident or construction or something, boy, you were lost at that point in time, because that printed out sheet didn't change. Nowadays, that map can reorient my trip for me along the way, and that's a key aspect of having metrics that matter as well. Those metrics have got to be dynamic and updating themselves so that I understand how to do a course correction along the way. But some other things are important too. I mean, we mentioned we're going to be driving from San Antonio to Vegas is about 1,600 miles. And I don't know about you, but my car doesn't go 1,600 miles on one tank of gas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to need to know when I'm starting to get low on gas so that I can make an intelligent choice about refueling. Now, what I could do is I could drive, 15, 20 minutes and then stop at the next gas station and gas up, right? But that's not very efficient. So having that feedback of a gas gauge, right, and especially something like a low fuel indicator can be really useful to me. And there's another cool thing too. When you get out into West Texas and you start driving, those speed limits go up, but there still is a speed limit. And if I drive too fast or too slow, well, the police might have take offense at that. And I don't really want to get a traffic ticket. So knowing the feedback of how fast I'm going is also something that gives me, and that, by the way, that's one of those instantaneous feedbacks, right? I need to know that not my average speed. I don't need to know, what speed I should be going. I need to know how fast am I going right now, so that I can make sure when I drive past that Texas highway DPS guy, right, that he's not going to flip his lights on and try to pull me over or something like that.
Okay. Great. And it's funny that you mentioned dashboards. We always get questions, especially in our group, about what a dashboard is. Everybody's kind of, or I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people have a conception of a dashboard has to have, certain look, certain feel kind of thing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. IBM years and years ago made probably one of the statements that I will never forget in my life, and that is a dashboard is whatever you need it to look like. And it was very well stated, because it can actually just be one number in the middle of the screen and still call it a dashboard, and that's very valid. So the bottom of the slide,
I think that's a key point, Alan, that you bring up, is that dashboards, and we'll talk about this more later, but dashboards have different purposes. If you think about, every car dashboard is relatively the same: a speedometer, an odometer, and a gas gauge, and then some kind of check engine light or oil pressure, those kinds of things that letting you know the car's working, right? But if you were to get into an airplane, right, totally different dashboard, because you have a whole wide range of different things that you need to have access to, right? So under those circumstances, a dashboard can be anything.
Mhm.
And sometimes, now, you and I were talking about this earlier. It used to be, I had an old 65 Ford Fairlane, and it had all kinds of gauges on the main dashboard, because it told me like the oil pressure, it told me the temperature of the radiator, it told me all these different things. My new car, it just has a check engine light, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, that check engine light is actually significantly, which gives me significantly more information about what's wrong with my car, or potentially wrong with my car, than just the oil pressure and the water temperature inside my car.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
So at the bottom of this, now we've talked a little bit about some of the different metrics, and obviously going through this, it's why they matter so much. Kind of getting to the crux of all of it, we've got an actionable way for the business goals here, and about managing. So how do these metrics provide that actionable way to achieve these goals?
Well, and I think that's a really important question, because, and if you think about that last bullet point we have on here, right, and the sub bullet point, there's an old adage that what gets measured gets done, right, and we've got that bullet point that says, you can only manage what you measure, but there's a corollary to that I actually think is even more powerful. What you can't measure, you can't manage. So if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have an ability to actually measure something, then you can't actually effectively manage it. And so let's imagine for a second here. So earlier I talked about not wanting to get a speeding ticket, right? Let's imagine that you're driving down the road and you don't have a speedometer in your car, right? If you don't have that ability to know how fast you're going, how would you be able to be tracked, and how would you be able to know that you're not violating the speed limit, going too fast or too slow? Well, you're going to look at other things around you. Well, how fast are the other cars going? I'll go the same speed they're going, right? And we all, after a while, we start to get feedback from our vehicles as
Mm-hmm.
to about how fast that vehicle goes. In my old Fairlane, I knew that when I got up to about 55, 60 miles per hour, that thing started to have a little bit of a shimmy to it, right? It would start to jiggle a little bit, okay? So I knew when I got up to about that speed, because that was back when the speed limit was 55 anyway, I knew I was going highway speed, right? And so I could stay below that, and I knew I wasn't breaking the law. But my new cars, they could probably get them up to 90, 100 before they'd start getting that kind of shimmy to them, right? And that's actually really important. So we have speedometers. So think about this from no. So that's our analogy to the car trip. But now let's take it to a business for a second, right? Every business, if you're a for-profit organization, right? In the end, your business is about making money. Okay, you want to bring in money, and so that's your ultimate business metric, right? But when you pop back for a second and say, hey, wait a second, um, I've got my business metric, that's great. If I step back, how do I know that I'm being successful? If I try some new sales program, or I try some new production program, if I don't have a way of measuring what happens when I do those things, I don't really know if it's being successful. Oh, look, I'm making more money. Well, is that because of the change I made in my production methodology, or my sales methodology, or in anything else I did? Or was it just demand went up that I had something I had no control over, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if everybody to go back to our car analogy, if everybody on the highway's driving 95, okay, and you go the same speed as everybody else, well, you're still breaking the speed limit, and you're not in alignment with those compliance and regulatory bodies, right? And the
Right.
police could pull you over and give you a ticket. So that's kind of the thing to think about. And so when we think about these things, in the end, it is about, am I going to be successful as an organization? Am I going to achieve my business goals? But to do that, I've got to be able to measure what's actually happening out there.
Okay, excellent.
All right. Well, let's go on here. So we've got so now that we kind of have laid out why metrics in and of themselves are important, let's talk about what makes up a metric, and how they aren't just a number. So we've been talking about speed limit, right? Is speed limit just a number? Is it 55? Is it 65? Whatever that is. So let's stop for a second and say, if we're talking about a metric, kind of we really want to think about what that actually is. And so, Alan, when we think about a metric, you used this term measurement with me earlier when we were talking about this. What do you mean by a measurement? When I think of a metric, right? My metric is, well, how well am I doing X? But what's a measurement from a definition standpoint as opposed to a metric?
So the biggest thing that we look at whenever we talk about the actual measurements is we have to be able to collect a certain amount of data in order to be able to come up with what it is that we're trying to do. So in your analogy, whenever it comes to where the driving, we have, you've got a lot of things that have to be calculated whenever it comes to what your speed is. And then the car puts all of that together. So whenever we look at, again, kind of going by the bullet points that we have up here, what is it that we're trying to influence? We're trying to influence certain things like good driving habits. So this speed limit is set for a particular reason. Whenever you're driving, your speedometer is telling you a relative speed and that you're high or you're low, and sometimes that can be good or bad in either direction. When we're looking for these measures, we're trying to do some very, very specific things. And that is, I need to try to find a small amount of information in order to tell me a large story. So that speed is telling you that exact large story. But there's other things up there that also matter because it's not just about your speed. It is about, you mentioned the like the warning lights that come on. Those warning lights is really all that you need to know that something is going on. I can find out later what that is, but I need to know that there's something to be concerned about. My service engine soon light came on. My maintenance light came on. It's getting too hot or whatever the case may be. All of that has other properties behind it, but I need to know right now that there's something that I need to be alerted to. And when it comes to these types of measurements, that's exactly what it is that I'm looking for.
So I'm thinking about that, and I'm going back to my old Fairlane, right? And so my Fairlane, like I said, had a limited number of gauges that I could actually look at. It had oil pressure, it had gas, it had speedometer, and it had water temperature, right? And that was fine for a 1965 car. Nowadays my Flex that I have, or my wife's hybrid that she has, there's a ton more information outside out there. I mean, as a great example, I can get a report that my tire inflation is low, which I thought was really cool, especially when somebody explained to me how they actually check it, having to do with the rotation of the wheel. And if one of the wheels is rotating faster, it's because the inflation is low on the tire. And I was like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. But what that gets to is this thing that you're saying is, you mentioned that IBM had the dashboard of being one number, right? And that can be a dashboard. But is that one number just one thing inside of your organization? Or is it, like when we think of speedometer, right? A speedometer is just the speed of the car. Okay. It doesn't tell me acceleration, doesn't tell me fuel efficiency, doesn't tell me anything else. It just tells me how fast I'm going. But we talked about in my car, I've got this range to empty, right? It's how far can I drive before I run out of gas, which is a nice thing to have if you're like me and you like to take your gas gauge all the way to empty before you refill. Unlike, my dad, who gets below a quarter of a tank and he wants to refill it, right? But the question is, that range to empty, that's not just a simple calculation, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. There's a lot of different things that have to go into that could go all the way. Now, cars definitely simplify it because it's something that does need to stay simple, because although I am driving from point A to point B, and it is giving us a range, it is giving us a best guess, because this is how many miles it is. This is, it can even figure out some of your driving habits to know that you're a little heavier on the pedal or things like that, to be able to determine how far you're going to be able to go on the amount of gas that you have. But realistically, that's changing by what's the terrain you're going across. Are you going up and down a lot of hills? Are you in sand? Is it raining? Is it, how many other variables are out there
to actually come
out with to come out with what the actual calculation is? This is just giving you, again, the information that you need right now to know there's a potential issue.
Let's tie that back to a business thing here, right? So what would be an example of a business metric that is this kind of a multi-system metric that would take information from multiple different systems and roll it together?
Yeah, absolutely. So Catapult, like many service organizations or project management type organizations, have like utilization, for example. Well, utilization for us is how much time am I spent, billing to a client, working on things that are internal and all of that? Well, to be able to come up with something like that, that takes a lot of different systems. We have a CRM system that tells us information about the customer, that the customer has a particular need. We have systems that tell us, like our HR system that says, I'm Alan, I have this skill set that may be able to fit into what that need is. And then we have another system that kind of tells us about like the resourcing perspectives. All of those have to come together to say, client has a need and we have a resource with availability and with the correct skill set. And it's, you kind of think of it as sort of a our clients' dating app. They like long walks on the beach and hate slow drivers. So by the time you get all of that stuff put together, we have the metric of being able to say that I might be utilized on a billing profile for 90% over this week or the next week or whatever the case may be. And of course, that fluctuates based on how much internal work I have, how much client work I have, and things like that. And it's a very important number to us and many other service organizations.
And I think what's important about that is to recognize that, at Catapult, with being a consulting company, we use utilization all the time because we know that utilization number directly affects our profit number at the end, right? And I think that's the key that we get into this whole process of how you tie this back. You have to, we have to understand our systems. We have to understand what our goal is. We want to make money. We have to understand what allows us to make money. For us as a consulting company, if we're not billing, then we're not making any money. And so our utilization is really important to understand that. And that means that we can take, because we now have a measure that shows us how much we're out there doing that work, as we make changes to internal policies or staffing or anything like that, we can actually see a direct correlation between those changes and the utilization number, which we know informs the bottom line. And so what we've done is we've added a level of information between that bottom line number. So going back to our analogy, bottom line number was arrived successfully in Vegas, right? Now I've got an interior number, range to empty, that's got a number of different calculations that are letting me know, hey, when you're driving towards there and you get to Van Horn and you realize it's another 100 miles to El Paso and you see that your range to empty is 50, you better stop and get gas now, or else you're going to run out of gas before you get to El Paso, the next city, right? And that enables us to make intelligent decisions, right? Which in the end is what this is all about.
Yeah, 100%.
So the other thing that you mentioned on here is this understanding that it's not just a number, right? So like a speedometer makes sense, or even range to empty is a number. But you also talked about having to have a target or a range of targets to give some feedback to people. And what do you mean by that? Because when you talk about optimal and suboptimal, what do you really mean, and how do we determine that kind of stuff?
So things can kind of go in both directions. And for example, whenever it comes to sticking with the car analogy, since we've kind of drugged that one out this far, when we look at, for example, your car's temperature, there is such thing as too cold, because if you've gone an extended period of time and the car's too cold, something's not working right. Your car's going to heat up. We know that, from the beginning. If it gets too hot, that's also an issue. So when we look at, that gauge or needle or whatever the case may be, there is a range that it's supposed to be in, and it's a fairly small range that it should stay. It gets a little warm, the thermostat opens up, it cools the car off, everything comes from the radiator, everything, just the water starts circulating kind of thing. And then it cools it back down, and then it starts heating up again, and then it cools back down. So it's got a range that is very, very acceptable for it to be in. And even in a lot of business practices, that same kind of things happen, that you can, like, going back to our utilization, we can vary a little bit, but we have, on that one, we have a very specific target number that we're trying to get. Over is good, under is bad. But if it's within a small percentage, then that's very acceptable, and we have to be able to figure out what that is so that we don't go into that suboptimal type category.
And so that leads to this whole concept of, would it be okay if instead of a speedometer, which actually shows, that whole kind of gauge, needle gauge, right? What if I just had like a red, yellow, green indicator? on there? Would that work for something like a speedometer, or is there a reason why we have that as a gauge?
There is, because we need, for that particular metric, we need something very specific. I mean, you're going to that example, would a pie graph work for a speedometer? And probably not. Could we use a bar graph? Well, technically we could. We'd just be only looking at one particular spot, and that's the very, very end. But if I'm trying to figure out, I've got a crew of drivers out there, and are all of these drivers, are they going the speed limit? I've got information that comes back from a GPS, and I've got information that comes back from their speedometer. Are they always going under? That I need sort of a time base in there, so it's a very different graph. So you always have to make sure that we're picking out that proper visualization, because normally speaking, when you are driving, you need to know what the speed is right now. What I was doing 15 minutes ago, not so important. So there's no reason to put that onto the screen.
Sure. And I guess nowadays in our modern world, especially with the explosion of IoT devices, right? We've got data coming in from all over the place. I mean, there's a great story about the long haul trucking company who had installed IoT into their trucks to monitor the refrigerator temperature inside of the trailers. And the reason, what they discovered was there was a direct correlation in a drop in the overall temperature of the refrigerator trucks and the refrigerator unit going bad. And when the unit goes bad, and suddenly they lost the whole load because they lost the temperature in the load, right? But what they discovered was when they started to see the trend line going down of that temperature in that truck, they would pull the truck out of service and get maintenance on it, and they had fewer trucks have to actually get fully renovated, and they, more importantly, didn't lose loads, right? Because in and of it, it's the same amount of money to service it and to repair it, right, for them. But what was killing them was the client wanted to have their stuff delivered on time. And if you deliver a bunch of spoiled food or other perishables, right, that's a bad thing. So when we think about our organizations, right, this is not just necessarily core systems that we're talking about. And that's one of the cool things about the 3 clouds that we're talking about these days as well. We've got core business systems that may be running with databases out in Azure and apps running in Azure. We could be talking about the LOB systems that are running inside of Dynamics, right? But we've also got Microsoft 365. Right. Remember, I told you I'm an evangelist for this stuff, right?
Yep.
But one of the cool things about Microsoft 365 is we're in it all the time. I mean, heck, we're in it right now doing this meeting, right?
Absolutely.
But people are sending emails. They're doing IMs in Teams. They are collaborating on documents and moving them around. Everything somebody does in Microsoft 365, Microsoft is tracking. And we can actually report against that using the graph APIs. And that means that I have a whole, that's like those IoT devices, right? That are sampling data from all over the place. We can actually go out now and sample information from other places as well, which opens up a whole nother range of potential metrics that we can look at in our organization. If we're looking at, and so from a business standpoint, if I have a system where I'm closing contracts, closing deals, right, I can actually track how many meetings were involved in that deal. I can track how much time was spent collaborating on documents, how many emails were going back and forth about that, because all of that stuff is happening inside a system that I have a level of visibility into, which means I can actually get a much better idea of what it cost me in effort, in human effort, right, to actually close that contract or that deal. And that means if I can measure it, right, what does it mean I can do? I can manage it. Yep. And so suddenly I've got the ability to actually fine tune my processes at a level that we never had before. All right, so I think we've kind of gotten this idea of what makes up a metric, right, at this point in time. So let's go on to the next section here. And here we're going to talk about how this all comes together when we actually start giving this to an organization. So, Alan, earlier we talked a little bit about this idea of multiple dashboards, but really when I think about it, wouldn't it make more sense to have one dashboard for my company that had every conceivable number on it, because then I'd only have to build it once and everybody could look at it and they would just learn to look at different places to find the numbers they look. Well, isn't that a better design pattern? I mean,
And
from
that's
an IT standpoint, it seems easier for me, right? But
mhm.
is that better for the company?
And that sounds great conceptually, but no. So one of the, if there's nothing else to take away from our talk here, it's probably this first bullet point that we have: the right metric, right audience at the right time, and that is extremely important. The financials reports that go to HR or employee task list that go to accounting or finance or something like that. It's typically, there might be cases, but it's typically just not going to make sense. And if we look at the first couple that we have here with the where we need the multiple groupings of metrics and for the different audiences, you need to make sure that what it is that you're trying to target, that you're actually getting that to that particular audience. And the best way to be able to do that is to actually talk to that audience. What is it that you look at for the job that you're trying to do? Because IT and IT has been trying to figure things out for a very long time, and that's how we started to get to this evolution of end user analytics, is because I know what I look at every single day. Can you give me the ability to be able to do some of this myself? And a lot of the products like Power BI, for example, are prime examples for being able to do that, because
Mm-hmm.
I can sit there and go back and forth and keep calling IT. I'm the business user now. I know what I need on the screen, so I'm just going to go and tell them. And then they're going to create something. It's going to take a couple of weeks in order for that to happen. And then they're going to get it back to me. And I'm going to look at it and say, well, yeah, that's what I told you, but I really need this to look a little bit different. I can go and pass it back to them. Another week later, I get it back. And you keep going to this back and forth kind of situation. And eventually, you're going to get exactly what it is that you want. The amount of time that
That
took.
sounds to me, Alan, what you're describing is really a very agile approach to how we would
Very.
devise analytics for an organization. Is that correct? Is it
That
really
is
an agile kind of thing?
that is absolutely correct.
And the second big key that you said out of that, and I'll let you talk again here a second, sorry, that I want to get out is it also starts with the person who's going to consume the metrics first.
100%.
So instead of me starting, and I think that's in the productivity world, we talk a lot about perception gaps, and we recognize that what the people at the top of the organization want to see or think is important isn't the same thing as what's in the middle and what's the bottom. And they actually they use an iceberg analogy for that, right? We all know that only the top little part of the iceberg sticks out, but those are the problems that get to the C-level people, right? But in reality, most of the stuff is beneath the water, and that's what this I would think that's what this whole agile analytics approach is actually going to deliver to somebody, is that ability to go down to those people who are down at the front line and give them what they need to get their job done, as opposed to what their manager or their manager's manager thinks they need to see.
Yep,
Is that
absolutely.
correct? Okay, good.
And the good thing about that is that you have two different approaches there. You have report and a reporting infrastructure that's actually created by a managed group. So there's somebody that actually helps define what's needed, and you've kind of created. I mean, you call it iceberg. I still call it a pyramid scheme. But
Same
whenever
thing.
we, so whenever you look at that, that is something that is very well thought out over extended periods of time. And the good thing is even when we go back to the end user analytics, they're creating things that can actually be used to figure out what it is that people need to see to sort of create that iceberg, that pyramid that we're talking about. The CEO of the company needs little bits of information about every single thing that's going on. So
Right.
here it is. And it's big red, yellow, green. If I see something red, I need to call somebody. Well, whenever I call somebody, it's okay, I've got this in HR that's showing something red. So I'm going to call whoever is the head of HR. And then they're going to call the next person down, the next person down. And as you go down sort of that pyramid, you get more and more detail about what's going on, which prompts that call to the next person to figure out what it is that's going on. And when you kind of create that pyramid structure, you've kind of created the perfect reporting structure, but you got help along the way in building that by your end users in a very, very a very good way of them being able to say, well, I don't have to just tell you what it is that I need to see. I can show you because I built this report over here, and here you go. And while you were doing all of that, I could still do my job. So it
And,
all kind of works around well.
and so what you described sounds like it would take years to develop, right? Because you would have to go out and talk to everybody in the company, and you'd have to make sure that you have all of that information in a data warehouse or a data lake or something, right? And then you'd have to build all these reports and build all these dashboards. Is that not like a multi-million-dollar, multi-year project?
It is, it absolutely is not. And the reason
Oh,
is
okay. Well, that's
because
good. I'm glad to hear that.
um, you've got, it does take extended periods of time, but the thing is because all those little requests that IT would typically get for all of this building is kind of eliminated. They can actually concentrate on the data itself and formatting the data in a way that everybody can get the information out, which makes once you get that data layer taken care of, building the reports is an extremely fast process. You have to have that good foundation and not have everybody going out to 15 different systems and trying to match it together, because when we do that, it's all over the place. So
Okay. And so one thing we have on here is talking about backing it up with details. And so you actually talked about this idea of the CEO seeing a red light on his
yep.
dashboard or her dashboard and having to call up somebody. Is that the way it should work, or is our eventual goal to be that they could maybe click on that light and see why it's red at that point in time?
Yes. And down to the next level, because you need to be able to see it. Again, you want your metrics to be able to reflect a small amount of information to give you a lot of information. So I can keep clicking down as far as I want to, because maybe I just need to know about total sales. I don't need to know every single customer and every single product that they bought. I'm
Mhm.
looking at that at a much higher level. Well, okay, so I found something, but I need to go a little further down because I need to find out what products were or were not selling that drove this deviation that I had in that
Sure,
metric.
sure.
And I can keep going down as far as I want to eventually. But if I didn't have
Okay.
to go and create this big Excel sheet and create all these graphs and charts and things like that, then I was better off staying at that higher level.
Well, now that thinking about Excel sheets, that brings another question that Nancy actually asked in the chat.
Mhm.
I mean, wouldn't it be simpler just to give people numbers, right, and let them just crunch all the numbers themselves? Why do we have all these different visualizations, and why would we use them? Like, why would we use a tree map as an example, right, or a
Mhm.
radar plot, or and there's a bunch of these things that exist in these charting tools that I've got no idea. I get a KPI, green, yellow, red. I get a gauge, right? I get a bar chart, but what the heck is a histogram or a scatter plot, and why would I use these things? I mean, how are they helpful?
Yeah, and you're definitely getting into much more advanced analytics. And I'll give you a good example whenever it comes to like that radar type chart.
Mhm.
We worked with a company that does drilling, and the whole IoT devices that are on that. Whenever it comes to that drilling, is to be able to say, I need the speed, I need to see if it's going off course, I need to see like where it's going. Well, you can actually look at that radar and tell what the speed was at any point in time, every single time that it measures, and it shows on there that it's going off course because I have a bunch of different axes that's happening whenever all of this is going on. So you wouldn't be able to see that in a bar graph. You can see that
Mm.
it went off course. Um, Time is one of the calculations that might be in that radar, but that's not the only calculation that you need. You actually have about 5 different axes to be able to kind of create that.
So if that's the case, I mean, is there a process that we go through or anybody goes through to kind of get that to I understand what is the best visualization? So this is the key, right? So I've got a bunch of data, right?
Mhm.
And we get that, but what is the process for deciding when to use these different types of visualizations? I mean, is it an experience model, or is there some best practices that we go down with that?
There are best practices to an extent, but
Okay,
again, the biggest thing that we need to determine is how many different access points do we have? How many different things are we measuring at one time? Because if I'm
okay,
looking for sales over time, for example,
mhm,
then a line chart works very well for that because you can actually see how that line went across a specific period of time. If
Sure.
I'm looking at something where I'm actually just comparing product sales, for example, well, a line can technically show that, but I'm not trying to look from point A to point B going across in order to do this. I'm actually trying to look and see how everything goes at a little bit more level set. So I want to see which ones are higher and which ones are lower. Time really doesn't have anything to do with product sales unless I'm looking at obviously product sales over time.
So that's
So,
more of like
we're going,
a pie chart, maybe would be something like that.
yeah.
Because I have
So
the pie is my sales, and I can look at the slices of the different areas, right?
pie charts, unless you have a very small amount of categories, are
Yeah.
actually very, very overused. So if
Okay.
I've got 3 products, a pie might work great. If I've got 50 products, if you want to try
Yeah.
to look at all those little tiny slices on there, you can, and it's pretty. Uh, but as far as the information that you need, not so much.
So what would you
That's
recommend if you had like 50 things like that? What would you recommend? Is that a tree map, or is that more of a bar chart, or is there something specific?
definitely more of a bar chart. So your
Okay.
bar chart and your line graph are going to be the 2 most used um, until you start trying to look at things like a trend KPI where I want a number, but I still behind it want to see something else, just so I can kind of get an idea that sales are going up or sales are going down. But I need a number because you might be talking to somebody that does like to look more at numbers than they do just comparisons, which is what those different visualizations are going to give to us.
And does that I think you keyed on a really important point there in that last thing that you said, which is this goes back to that whole idea of talking to the people who are going to be looking at the dashboard, right?
100%. Mhm.
And understanding, is it easier to visualize this a certain way, because what's their mental model when they need to see this, when they're looking at this dashboard? What are they thinking about? Like you
Mhm.
pointed out, the drilling rigs, right? We're trying to track all this information coming in from IoT devices. How are we knowing that I'm going off course, or I'm hitting a different kind of terrain, or whatever that's going on inside of that? I can plot that a different way than if I'm just wanting to see how much how much product is coming out, or how deep I've gone in a certain period of time. Those are different measures, and they're different feedback. So the person running the drill rig, the tool pusher, right, is got a different view of things than the engineers that are back watching what's happening at a different level.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Uh, and especially when you've got drill tips that cost $1 million, it's pretty important that everything's going
Yeah.
perfect.
All right, Alan. Well, thank you very much. This has been really a lot of fun, and I hope that
Absolutely.
people have kind of gotten a feel now to kind of go back over the things that we wanted to talk about, right? Obviously, why these are important, because it's how we run our business and manage it, right? And if we take something away, if we can't measure it, we can't manage it, right? Um, then how we define these things, we've got to go get some great information. Okay. We have to understand where to find that information and how to put it all together. And when it all does come together, it's really important that we talk to end users and make sure that they're getting information in a way that makes sense. And I think it's also important to recognize that Alan, what you mentioned, this does not have to take years and millions of dollars to do. We can start with single solutions and then build that out into a comprehensive solution. Okay, so we want to thank all of you for attending today. We've got we do have the survey for you guys, and we're going to take questions here in just a second. And we've got a 15-minute break. But please take the survey. Let us know how we did. And remember, you were entered to be one of 2 winners of $75 gift cards. So please do fill out the survey. You can just scan the QR code with your phone and go ahead and fill it out. And there's also a link to it in the chat, and we will go ahead and open this up for questions from the people, from the crowd. And so we want people just to put their questions in the chat, is our understanding. And you can also do your raise hand. And what we can do, if you raise your hand, we can go ahead and come off mute and let you go ahead and ask your questions.
Does
Alan,
silence mean we did everything perfectly?
Well, either that or I put him to sleep with my
That's right.
droning delivery and the like. But you know, you mentioned those $1 million drill bits, right? And that is especially nowadays where we do the horizontal drilling and stuff like that. It absolutely technically is absolutely amazing how they do that stuff. But it makes me think of the. Did you ever see the movie? Oh, it was the one that Daniel Day-Lewis was in? Blood for Oil or something like that. I think that was the name of it. But do you remember the scene with him with the milkshake, where he would talk about how he was making an analogy about how when you're drilling sideways, you can steal somebody else's oil? There will be blood. Thank you. There will be blood. That was the name of that particular one.
Thank you, Travis.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Well, sounds good. Did you want to pull up that last slide? Just because I like the little QR code, or did
Oh,
didn't I go
no,
through it?
Is it not on the QR on the QR code?
That's
I
not
see
the
the
one that
QR
I'm.
code.
Okay,
Oh,
you see the
okay.
QR code? Good.
Oh, that's just me then. Great.
Yeah, I don't know why
Glad
you're
all
not
the
seeing it.
I'm glad all the other slides work good.
Yeah, and like I said, you've got you know, you're going to be getting the recording afterwards, right? Or link to the recording, so you can go ahead and if you want to hear us again, you'll be able to download it and see and get access to this. And then also, you know, feel free to reach out and ask a question. I'm going to pop back. We actually have a an innovation workshop, which, if you think about it, when we talked about that whole idea of how do you start small, how do you start in a way that actually adds value and does it pretty um, um, uh, pretty quickly and agilely, right? The innovation workshop's a great place to start. Now, I do see a question in here, controlling views and charts in Dynamics 365. So, so Christine, I'm trying to make sure I understand what your question here. So, are you saying that you've got things that are in too many charts in D365? Yeah. So that is one of the hallmark problems that you're going to see of any of the dashboards that we talked about earlier. We don't really want to have one that has too much stuff, right? Because if you have too much stuff, it is exactly what you said. It is overwhelming. So my understanding is that you should be able to edit those pages and change what you see on that, and even change the visualizations that it's using for those different charts as well inside of D365. But I've got a coworker of mine who can who might be able to give you some specific advice around that. So if you want to reach out to me, dbruce@catapultsystems.com. But we can maybe talk more deeply about that. I agree with you, by the way. I go to Dynamics and I click on the drop down, and there's this just huge drop down of all these things, and you're trying to figure out which one means what. And there are ways to control the visibility of those kinds of things, because I don't necessarily need to see 50 different views of a list. I can show you, and you can also set your default of which one you know that you want to be displayed when you come in there. And I think that's probably the best thing that you can do, is that when you come in, have it display for you what you want to look at. So I'm glad you have set that up. But I think you can also make it to where things are not visible on your list. But I'm not a D365 expert, but we can ask one of our D365 guys. If you want to reach out to me, I can put you in touch with somebody.
Absolutely. So little quick note that I also wanted to throw in there, because we did see the question earlier about the visualizations and things like that. Even whenever it comes to this multi-year, multi-million-dollar product that we're trying to build, when it comes to building out this data warehouse, a little suggestion. We've been through this many times. Whether you do it yourself or you enlist Catapult to be able to help you out, we hope that you come to us. Make sure that you're not trying to boil the ocean all at one time. We use that analogy here a lot. Start with one business problem that you have. Answer that question in something small. If you're doing everything properly, like in a dimensional model, which is what we typically prefer to use, then after you get that model built, then you can keep expanding that out, as David had talked about a little bit before. But just start small, because you can keep growing it out, and it retains value the entire time. So it's not like you're waiting for a project completion before it's done with. You can actually get value from the time that that very first small model is built, and then organically keep growing it. And it makes for a very agile process, because what's important today may not be important tomorrow. So when you start it off that way, it's much easier to take in.
Mhm.
And I think that's it for me. I know we got another crew getting ready to start in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Nice
Like that.
job, fellas. Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thank you.